Hello and welcome to Two Mutables in a Pod. This podcast weaves our life experience with our love for astrology, alternative healing and Black culture. My name is Mimi.
And my name is Emily, and we are your hosts. And welcome to the Two Mutables in a Pod podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 10. This episode is all about anchoring your birth chart. In other words, how to work with your birth chart. This idea came to me a few weeks ago when I was just kind of like sitting and reflecting about how much astrology is a part of both Emily and ours lives and how much we dibble and dabble with our own birth charts. But I thought to myself, like, how much do we utilize and leverage our birth charts, and how many people out there are actually leveraging their birth chart? And that opened up a whole can of worms, because whenever like friends or like other people come up to me, they always ask me about transits and like what's going on currently and what might be affecting them. And usually I can have an answer. But there are so many other aspects that we can work on that can really invite us to work with our chart in a non-fear mongering way. Because I don't know about you and your experience, Emily. I think one of the most common things I get asked about is Mercury retrograde doing something to me? Is this because of Mercury retrograde? And I get it, because it's what we see in social media and pop culture. It's quite popular that we are now aware of it. But there, number one, are so many other transits that we can be affected by. And number two, so many other things outside of transits that we can be influenced by. So yeah, I wonder if you've had that experience of people asking you about Mercury retrogrades.
Do you know, it's so funny because it's one of the things that is most popularized, as you said, going back to the point about it being something that's used to fearmonger. On social media, looking at certain accounts that I have followed in the past and still follow presently, I think when I look at the comments section, it's something that I do observe quite a lot. It's quite interesting because where I do have obviously Mercury as my chart ruler, and then natively Mercury's retrograde for me, the time where I had decided to come off social media during Mercury retrograde, and Mercury, it was transiting Sagittarius at the time. Typically we see the whole, your ex might call you back, you might have to prepare for communications from long lost lovers. And I mean, whilst it might not necessarily be an ex, it might even just be the thought of previous things that have happened in the past. But because that is what is sensationalized, that is what we tend to see a lot in. So in my own networks, I mean, I feel like I'm that fact checker amongst the girlies. I'm like, girls, you know what? It's nothing for us to, be afraid of and fear. I know that certain people are like, don't start any new projects, but we started what we started during that period. You mentioned early on in your intro that the transits and other tools can help shape the ways that you utilize the stars and the astro and the knowledge that surrounds it. I think it's also important to go with how your spirit feels as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think I hopefully have answered your question, but I want to say in my immediate circle, it used to freak us out. Now there's some sort of awareness and understanding that it's not that doom and gloom.
Yeah. No, you definitely have answered the question. And yeah, I think you raised a very valid point as well, and something that I try to remind myself, but also remind people around me, that all of these things are going to happen, but they're going to happen irrespective of what the planets are doing. But it's more about how do you feel and how does it connect to your spirit. So I'm glad you mentioned that aspect, because as much as I love all of the tools and the modalities that we both work with, there's also the element of needing to separate tool-based things versus what your spirit or what your soul feels. I definitely agree with that. I also wondered, just as part of our intro, how do you define, or how do you know the difference between knowing your birth chart versus working with your birth chart, or what does that look like for you?
Oh, knowing your birth chart versus working with your birth chart. I feel like knowing your birth chart is knowing that you have an understanding or awareness that I have so-and-so placements. I might be a Virgo sun. I might have, my ascendant might be ruled or in the sign of Sagittarius. And having an understanding of what your chart outlay would look like.
Yeah.
You might be familiar with the particular, I want to say, are they glyphs? The glyphs that rule the
Yes.
particular
Yes.
size. You might have an understanding, you can recognize them. You might know what the twins might look like. You might know what the Scorpio one looks like. But utilizing and working with your birth chart really looks at beyond
Mm.
just those placements and how you can incorporate this in your daily lives. Like, for example, if I'm planning a trip, am I going to look at, perhaps when Jupiter is in a positive movement or a positive placement, will I plan my trip around this season? Or, if I want to get a new hairstyle done, if I want to change up my physical look, will I look and wait to see where Venus is positioned in my chart? I might look at transit. I
Mhm.
might then evolve and look at the tools that look at the solar
Mhm.
return chart and how I can harness that particular energy. So I think it really is about moving from looking at just what the databases and the charts and the tables and the online systems that we see, and actually incorporating these, I want to say, harnessing, incorporating these energies throughout our daily lives. So I think it's a daily practice, as opposed to oh, I'm aware of this and I know this, but how am I using this in my day-to-day activity? How am I using this particular planet to work and assist me?
Yeah.
I think that's how I would define the difference between knowing your birth chart and then obviously utilizing the energy from your chart.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I agree with that. And I think this is something that I've also learned quite a lot from you in terms of just being aware of like how the present overlays can influence your existing overlay. And I think when this thought came to me about leveraging the birth chart, it actually wasn't to do with any of the things that we're going to speak about. It was me thinking about, oh, I can't remember what it was specifically, but I remember thinking to myself, okay, if I'm feeling a bit stuck, where do I need to go in my birth chart to kind of figure out how to become unstuck? So, for example, I think it might have been me looking at my Gemini ruled house and thinking about my part fortune there, and then how can I
Yeah.
kind of tap into that energy and how can I leverage that energy, because it's maybe something that historically years ago I would have been like, no, communication and expression is something that I really struggle with. And I would have maybe assumed that identity. But over the years, like just being able to look at actually these are the certain existing placements that I have, and how can I feel that energy so that I can start to have like a give and take kind of relationship with my chart. So that's where my original thought process was. And then I was like, oh, but there are other ways that we definitely access and leverage our chart, which we're going to go into.
I like the give and take thing because whether you're a first timer, whether you're a beginner, whether you're an intermediate, whether you're an advanced practitioner or student, I think it can be overwhelming. I mean, even myself, when I look at my transit, sometimes I'm like, whoa, like this is a lot. And, looking at that whole circle, there's so many different parts for you to absorb and take in that sometimes you do need to have a give and take approach. Sometimes you need to focus on a particular area of your chart as opposed to the whole 360 circle of your chart.
Yeah.
But one thing that you said, which is quite interesting, is that, you've taken the time being able to look at the other tools that help us utilize as opposed to just knowing our charts, and understanding the energy around your part fortune and your Gemini ruled house, and how certain things are more in your awareness, and it's like those missing dots, those connecting pieces are starting to make sense for you. And I think there's never really a final destination. I think we have always said this in pretty much most of our recordings, that sometimes when you feel like you've even understood the full potential of a planet, another epiphany hits you and you're like, oh damn, like I can see it from this perspective. So, I think that also goes hand in hand with knowing the difference between just knowing your chart and then obviously utilizing it and harnessing your chart for positive. And obviously, again, you're not always going to look at your chart for just beneficial things. I mean, there might be harder, difficult transits or difficult experiences that you're going through that need you and require you to be able to understand these experiences through the lens of astrology.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Emily and I both share this natural desire to teach and for other people to learn and like gain tools so that you can then go, or people can then go and take ownership and feel empowered through any of the tools or any of the suggestions that we're working with. So yeah, that leads us beautifully on because this next segment, Emily and I are basically just going to cover a couple of avenues or roads in which you can, as listeners, start to look at your chart in a different way, as an invitation to kind of explore how you could leverage or anchor the energy that's already existing and the energy that's already kind of circulating around in the sky. So whilst we won't have the opportunity to break down every single sign, every single planet, every single house with the areas that we're talking about, the hope is that we can give like a foundation of knowledge so that you can then go off and explore it for yourselves. So the first one that I want to speak about is chart rulers. And I think for me personally, it took a while for me to really become comfortable with my own chart rulership. And I think it's something that I still kind of feel I'm working on in terms of establishing the connection, the relationship, and the identity with how my personal chart ruler shows up for me. So, what is a chart ruler? Just very briefly, um, your chart ruler is basically the planet that is ruled by your rising or your ascendant sign. So, at the start of the podcast, Emily mentioned about her having mercurial energy or having a Mercury rule chart. Now, Emily said that because she is a Virgo rising, and Virgo is associated, should I say,
Yeah.
by the planet Mercury. So, in terms of, I guess, Emily's, I kind of see like chart rulers as like your theme of life, your expression of life, but also
Yes.
it kind of can lead you to think about um, where you're going to focus that energy. For example, I don't have Emily's chart in my head. Well, yeah, no, I think I know. So Emily is a Virgo rising. I don't know why I've decided to pick on you. I'm sorry. I should have
I
been mine.
know.
Emily is a Virgo rising. You might have to correct me. But where if we were to look at where Mercury is in Emily's chart, and Emily mentioned hers is retrograde, I believe it's in your 10th.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
It
yes.
is. Yay.
So Mercury sits in Emily's 10th house in Gemini. Again,
Yes.
remember that correctly? Yeah.
Yes, you did. You did.
So, if we were to think about what that means for Emily, her life theme is all about communication, processing, expression, and the avenue in which she will do that, or the area in which it might be more highlighted, is areas in where she has to be visible to a certain extent, has to have some sort of status associated to a certain extent, and it's like it's the highest point in her chart for Emily. So it's like her highest mission, her highest purpose in a way. So all themes, all roads for Emily would lead back to Mercury ruled aspects. And that includes also the processing part. It's her logic, it's her reasoning, it's her written expression, not just verbal. There are so many things that Mercury relates to just outside of your verbal expression and verbal
Yes.
communication. So I'm hoping that makes sense, having a working explanation.
Me listening in, as you know, me being the example, I'm like, yes, it does make sense from how you explained it. And then also, given the fact that this also is the shared ruler with my 10th house, I see what you're saying. And just to like echo what you're saying before you continue, that we might hear that, oh, I'm so rising. I might be, you know, a Leo rising. Sorry, that I was about to say Virgo, and then Leo came to me next because, yeah, I realized that you covered that. And just knowing that might be like, oh, I think I've arrived. I think I know it. But then, you know, to take that onion layer a bit further, it's being able to look at the planet that actually rules that particular sign. And I think that, as you said, it's the way that you express yourself. I think it's also the way that you present yourself to the world, and it is quite essential in how you understand the self. Although there are other planets, other aspects, other asteroids that might help you understand, but if you are really in your intermediate or beginning stages, I think it's important for you to learn how these chart rulers, and particularly the ruler that rules your rising sign, helps to assist you navigate your chart.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think the easiest or the key to this is getting to know the planet and getting to know
Yes.
the planet's expression, its desires, its kind of struggles and everything before you then start to plot where it fits in terms of the theme of your life or the house that it represents in. So really get to know the planet, I would say. Between Emily and myself, we say this a lot. It's an ever ongoing learning process for both of us, and there's no kind of like level of expertise that we claim to be at. But even myself this morning, when I was thinking about this, I was like, oh my gosh, like I had a realization about my own
Mhm.
chart ruler and then where it sits in my chart, and I was like, makes sense. Can't deny it, can't deny it, it makes sense. So just like being able to have those mini light bulb moments, I think it's ever evolving, I would say.
Yeah, and I feel like it's so heartwarming. And I mean, I hope you don't mind me asking this question, but
Mm.
from where you started out in your journey to where you're at right now, and as you're mentioning, we aren't claiming a level of expertise. We are just simply curious-minded people who love to evolve and grow. And I think a lot of the work that we do is about soul evolution. And just from where you started out to where you are right now, have you gone through different phases where you associate with your chart ruler in different ways? Are there times where you're like, I don't really feel it? Or is it hard for you to sometimes see your chart ruler, given the fact that it's reversed? So it's not directly opposing the seventh house, it's in the eighth house. So it sometimes can blindside you. And
Yeah.
do you at times have periods where you can resonate and you do feel the energy of that sun ruling your first house and your Leo rising?
Yeah, I think as I said towards the start, like for me, it took me a very long time to understand the energy of the sun and how much that represents the theme of my life, because I don't feel like I have a sunny disposition.
Yeah.
I don't feel like all things related to the sun in terms of their energetic representation shows up in my life. And
Mhm.
I think that is because it sits in my eighth house natally for me. So I feel a muted version, I feel, more so than the kind of bright, expansive version. I kind of feel it's almost like having an opposition, not so close, obviously, because you have opposition energy that you know and experience well on
Yes.
a daily basis. But it's almost like having the sun behind curtains for me, because there is the eighth house connotation that it carries of kind of the transformation, let's say. Let's try and keep it light.
I mean, I understand the analogy of the curtains behind it because, again, if you think about the solar energy or I want to say the benefic, because the sun is seen to be a benefic planet. Benefic simply means something that is of, I think, positive virtue. It's meant to bring benevolence. Like it's meant to be something that you aren't going to think about and think, oh God, why do I have this in my chart? Because of the positivity associated with it. And when you think about the sun, when it's a hot sunny day, everyone's vibe is different, everyone's happy. So you understand the type of message that it's bringing. And as you're saying, when you have that, in a house that sometimes deals with that which we cannot see, deals with the things that are hidden and suppressed, as you said,
Mm,
transformation and change. I can
mm,
understand why that, that jovial or jolly positive side or attribute that is attached to the sun might not be something that you resonate with. And I think this is why, going back to the example that you spoke about, Mercury being my chart ruler, it's important to also look at the house placement. Where is this particular planet placed within my own birth chart? Because you might not necessarily resonate with the generic description of being a Leo rising or being a Virgo rising or being, a Capricorn rising. You might have to dig a bit deeper in order for you to understand why your chart outlay, as Mimi has mentioned, given your house alignments and the
mm.
placements and some of the positions of certain planets, why it might not come out in that, I want to say, is it generic or standard textbook form? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just as you were talking, actually, it made me think, like, do you know any other Virgo risings, or do you know any Gemini risings? Like, do you know personally people who share the same chart ruler as you? And what's that experience like when you kind of think about the differences versus similarities of the energy?
Oh, I like this question. I do, because through the great space of social media, most specifically Instagram, I have come across two Virgo risings, which is so crazy. Yeah, one of them that I know quite well. I feel like more of her Scorpio placements come out louder than her Virgo rising. Yeah, and it's crazy because we have the same house outlay, right? And we have similar placements, given the fact that we're born quite close. Like she's born in July and I'm born in June, but the same year. So
Oh,
there's quite a lot of similarities in our charts. Like she's got the same Mars sign as me, same Chiron sign as me. But it's that Scorpio energy within her chart that's a bit more pronounced, that comes out a bit stronger. Whereas, Tamba, who we're going to have on the pod quite soon, she is also a Virgo rising. And there's something warm about her. Like even when she communicates, even when she speaks, as we've been emailing, like I'm just like, oh, you're such a darling. And I'm like, oh, that Cancer degree. Like it makes sense why that just feels very warm and friendly and approachable to speak to you. So it's quite interesting to see the difference between the two. But yeah, I think the ones that I do know, we aren't the same, although we share the same chart ruler, sorry. I think our expressions are quite different.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I like that, the expressions that are different.
Expressions.
Because I was thinking about another Leo rising.
Yes.
They have a very much, they have a childlike spirit, a childlike energy. They've got,
Yes.
that's because their sun is in their fifth house. So
Oh.
it makes sense with them why they just carry
Natural.
that natural spirit.
I was literally just going to ask you, but you answered the question. I was like, do you know of any other Leo risings? And what's that experience been like, comparing and contrasting the expression of your chart ruler with theirs?
Yeah. I think it's the so many similarities again because we're born not too far apart, as a couple of years apart,
Yes.
but they have more, like I said, that childlike spirit, that childlike nature, and very playful with that energy. And I do attribute that to it sitting in the fifth house, their sun.
Yes.
Just yeah, that's what I would say. So yeah, I'd love for us to maybe move through to transits because that's yeah, another biggie.
Yeah, so transits. I mean, again, when I started my astro journey, I didn't know a thing or two about transits. I was barely just trying to get to grips with my own natal chart. And even then, because it can sometimes, especially if you're a visual learner, or if you absorb information, because as Mimi said with Mercury, it's not necessarily just how you communicate, but it can also deal with the ways in which you absorb and process information. And whilst I am okay with long form, written form stuff, sometimes when I see things visually, it can throw me off. So, you
Yeah.
know, I was barely getting to grips with like my birth chart, and I don't know what even prompted me to start looking at transits, but I had downloaded time passages at the time when it was still Navy. I missed the old outlay. And I clicked this random thing. It was like, add transits. And I was like, oh, what's that? Let me add transits. And I also had, is it Time Nomad? I think I had Time Nomad too. And
Okay.
this was sometime in 2020 where I just would like press random buttons. I don't know what the hell I was doing, but I was pressing random buttons. I knew that it said transit and I tried to follow along, but I couldn't quite grasp my mind around Time Nomad. And that's why I moved across to Time Passages. And I remember just seeing what time do you want to pull it up for and what location, the city. And I was like, oh, okay. I put London, I put the time, and then this whole other chart came out, and I saw that there were like I have my inner wheel, which is obviously my own natal planets, and then there was an outer wheel of these transiting planets. And I was like, oh, not that I understood what exactly was going on. And, I think because most, I guess, online systems or astro databases tend to use like, certain colors like red, blue, and green, for example. I just saw all of these lines and I was like, what the hell is going on here? And it took me a lot of trial and error. It took me a lot of practicing, a lot of practicing. And I think it is a science, it is an art. I mean, some people would even say it's a math. And I think the more you practice, the more that you refine the skill. But I started to just get curious. Like I wanted to know a bit more about what's going to happen on this particular day. And I did this around events. Like if I was planning something, if I was planning like a barbecue, for example, if I was planning like a birthday event, would I do it on this weekend or would I choose this day? But with transits, I just started pulling things out just because I wanted to know what was happening on a particular day. Like if I was meeting a friend, would I rather meet my friend when the moon's in Taurus, or would I rather meet my friend when the moon is in Sag and I want to explore and have fun? And that's kind of how I started my journey with transits. And then I found that in conversations that I had with people, I was just curious to know what the planets were saying for them at that particular moment in time. And as I grew with my understanding, grew with my expertise and knowledge around how to interpret the transit chart, which again, it literally can tell you, for example, yes, you have your birth chart, which looks at the planets and where they were positioned when you were born, but a transit chart tends to explore what the planets of this precise moment in time where you're pulling the chart are positioned at and what influence, what I want to say, what impact does this have for you? And I
Mm.
think I started to do this with the moon. I tracked the moon and then I would track certain things that stood out to me. Sometimes I'd look at where Venus was positioned. Is Venus in an affliction? Am I being negatively impacted by this? Is this causing a strain on me? Or is this enhancing an energy that already exists within my chart? And I think later down in the timeline, when I started talking to Mimi, we'd start to look at certain things. I'd be like, oh, let's see what this is at. What's happening with your chart at this particular time? And I find that it helps to understand the current energy that surrounds you in the now. Like your birth chart it's when you were born, but we're looking at what's happening in the now, what's influencing you, what's impacting you. And I think I started to get comfortable with interpreting certain things. Like I knew that fine, in I'm going to take Gemini season because we are recording this in Gemini season. I know that in Gemini season, when the sun is transiting my 10th house, there's going to be a few conjunctions that are happening. I'm going to be able to track certain things around the 10th house aspirations, goals, and desires that I have. Or, like when the full moon's happening, what particular house is this transiting and impacting? And what kind of themes am I going to encounter? What kind of things can I reflect on? Because again, some of these transits, you might not even feel the impact. Some of them happen so quickly. If you think about the moon cycle, it's every 2.5 days that it's changing. So you might not even feel the impact if it's not directly impacting your natal chart. Not to say that you're never going to feel a moon transit, but if you have no placement in, let's just say, the house of Sagittarius, for example, but then you do have Gemini placements, you might feel the opposition, but you might not feel the conjunction because there's no planets in that particular sign. And that's kind of how I started my journey with transits and just picking out what was applying and what was flying. And I mean, I must admit, some things when I see them in a transit chart, I'm like, I don't want to see, can't hear no evil. It does not apply to me. And I think I think before the run up to Saturn in Pisces, I was really obsessed with the transit chart. Like, I wanted to know at what month Saturn was exactly conjuncting my natal Saturn in my chart. And, I think sometimes will I admit that I've been fixated on the transit chart? Yes. I think you kind of figure out your temperament as and when you go. You realize that, okay, is this an area that's a bit too intense for me? And I need to revisit it in stages. And that's something that I had to like have one-to-one meetings with myself about. But I think the long term, it's really helped me get comfortable with understanding the energy of the now, understanding and also throw myself out of the comfort zone because no one's ever going to fully understand all of their birth chart because as we said, there are certain things that come to us, epiphanies, revelations that we get in the waking state, in the dream state, and as we are experiencing life. But with the transit chart, I got comfortable with understanding challenging aspects. I don't necessarily fear them, or I'm no longer fear mongered by them. And as Mimi said quite earlier on in the intro, it's quite easy in any part of your astrological journey to feel the fear that comes with certain practitioners. And the one that I've seen quite a lot right now or in March and April was when we had, Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and it's all
Yeah.
about the war that's going to come and all this fear mongering. And I think, when you understand your own transit without the dependency on another individual, it allows you to gain your stability back internally, but it also allows you to regulate yourself. You're like, okay, you're going to pause for a second. You're going to think, am I going to allow myself to be fear mongered, or am I going to check this and understand this for myself? And I think when you are seeking to actually practice and embody, make this a daily practice, or make this something that is a lifestyle as opposed to a one-time thing, it's important for you to be able to do this independently without the dependence. Of course, have a guide, have a mentor, have somebody who's able to coach and guide you. But
Yeah.
when you are able to do this independently, which I think comes through the power of understanding your transits, I think this allows you to be able to reason, to check and balance certain things without falling into prey or falling into the hands of predators who could potentially, I don't want to say scapegoat because that's not the word, but abuse their knowledge in order to keep you enshackled
Yeah.
in fear. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It really stood out to me because you kind of mentioned like two different driving or motivating factors for you working with your transits.
Hmm.
The first one was about you using it more in a planning sense and trying to again leverage and enhance the energy. So for example, if you were having any beauty treatments or hair treatments, looking at where Venus might be and seeing if there's any positive aspects that might support that process for
Yes.
you. But also on the flip side, you experiencing life and then thinking, what might be going on that could indicate that this is why this is happening, or this is why I'm feeling this.
Hmm.
I like that you gave the spectrum of both so that people can understand that it's not necessarily for you to be strictly guided or led by these transits, but you can also just go about your life, live life, and then reflect on it in retrospect. So
Yes.
I really appreciated when you gave the two examples of that, but also you mentioning about not getting wrapped up or caught up and you having to really catch yourself. And
Yes.
I would love if you're able to maybe just to go a little bit deeper into that. Like, how did you get to the point of not becoming fixated with what might look like a quote bad transit? Like, what supported you to get to that point? Because like I said, like for me, working with transits very much came as a result of our friendship. And
Yes.
for a long time, and even still now up until this point, I will avoid it because I don't want to get caught up in the, oh no, this is going to happen. Oh no, oh no, oh no.
Yes.
And I had another question, but yeah, let's start there.
Okay. I'm going to start with your first question. So, it didn't come to me overnight, but
Yeah.
I realized, and I can't pinpoint a particular time, but I'm going to use a time frame between, I always go back to my Saturn return. But I think I really had to understand that irrespectively or irrespective of where the planets are aligned within my own birth chart or transiting my own natal chart,
Mm,
life is still going to happen. And whether I choose to only absorb all of the fear mongering that comes, because, I had Saturn square Venus, I had Saturn
mm,
square my moon, I had I had Saturn opposing Chiron, Saturn opposing Mars. I had it all really, and a lot of my chart is heavily mutable. The conjunctions again, when you kind of understand the aspects which speak to how the planets communicate with each other, speak to how they interact with one another, you realize that if you switch the terminology, you know how
mm,
in our episode where we spoke about when we have the word dream in our head or dreams in our head, it can sometimes place a barrier to how, if you aren't a dreamer, you
mm,
might not necessarily access that, you might not necessarily believe or deem what you're dreaming about worthy. And if we change it to revelations, would we look at it differently? And likewise, so I had to change the terminology around the aspects, even with the squares, even with the oppositions. Like when I used to see those red lines in a transit chart, oh boy, it used to send my heart beating and I used to feel butterflies in my stomach because I was really anxious and worried about the outcomes of the what ifs. Quite similarly, I was very worried for the Saturn square Venus transit, extremely worried about that. And I think when I started to realize that even if things go pear-shaped in, quote unquote, as a result of having the square, the intensity of the two planets conflicting one another, I still have the ability to come out on the other side. And I
Yeah.
think I had to change the mindset around bad being something that's also part of character development, but also there to help me evolve on the other side. and
Yes.
and then also I had to change how I viewed my relationship with aspects. I'm not going to lie, there were still certain transits, like when I have transits in my 12th house, I'm like, I want to go under the rug, and that still is something that I struggle with quite a lot. When we hit Leo season, I feel like that period between July and
Mm,
August for me can sometimes feel like a bummer, and
mm,
I've had to learn to not automatically write out a particular experience because it feels, in my mind, I've told myself that because it's a 12th house transit, it's going to be a bummer for me. And I think this is something I want to challenge myself. Well, guys, we'll revisit this in Leo season, but this is something I want to challenge myself for this year. How can I still, I want to say romanticize, but also flip the coin, flip the other side of the story around, that I don't also automatically believe that because the sun's entering my 12th house, that's it, I want to hide and I have to go away. How can I enjoy that particular transit, even though it's going into a heavier house? And I
yeah.
think for me, the two biggest things, just to sum up my answer, is the ways in which I use terminology around particular transits. Even when I do see the big scary red lines, I actually pause first. I actually look at the transit and I come back to it later. And maybe I might come back to it with a different perspective, or maybe I won't. But I think being able to pause, being able to have those safeguards that I don't automatically jump in to start fretting and think, oh my God, it's the worst, because
Mm,
I've been there and I've done that. And I've realized that irrespectively, the transit's going to happen and I'm still going to live life. Free will does exist. And I think that also is I think we spoke about this when we looked at past lives. Have I been here before? Free
mm,
will definitely does play a role in some of our experiences. Yes, destiny is destiny. And I think some of these planetary alignments, again, the reason why we are studying this, the reason why we do practice astrology is because we do care about destiny. I think, if we didn't care about fate, destiny, we wouldn't care about how past alignments are impacting future alignments and all of these things. And I think irrespectively of whether a transit can be deemed bad or negative or hard, I'm not trying to sugarcoat the fact that you will go through real life experiences, but
mm,
this is also part of destiny coming into play. But you also have free will to change how you're doing it this lifetime. And I
mm,
think when you start to change your mindset around some of these things and start to reframe how you word some of these transits, even if I do see a square coming up, okay, what is that particular square communicating to me? And what can I potentially learn from this upcoming transit? And I think these are some of the ways that I've had to reframe my mind so I don't lose the plot, because it's very easy to lose the plot. And I
yeah.
think, had I had absorbed and still retained onto what some astrologers deem to be negative and soul crushing experiences, which some of them really are, I think I wouldn't have this relationship that I do have with transits. And you are right. Like, as a result of our conversations, I really do respect transits. I really do love this astrological tool because it helps us look at what's happening around us now. Have I been on top of the ball with it right now in this season of my life? No, I haven't.
Yeah.
Maybe I might go and check my transit chart afterwards, see what's going on. But I think when you do have the capacity and the energy to, it's something that I would encourage because it helps with your own development
Mm.
as an astrologer and as a student of the study and the stars.
Yes, yeah. This is also like a question to you, but also maybe a key tip slash guidance for other
Hmm.
people. So I'm trying to think how to word it.
No, it's okay.
What transits do you work with the most in terms of planets, but also wording that in a way is like, what's the go-tos for you, but also maybe if someone was a bit of a newbie, what transit, sorry, could they prioritize or focus on first? But also, what are you influenced by the most in terms of transits, apart from yourself?
Okay. Yes. I mean, do you know what? One thing, tie this back to the initial conversation, which was all about, your chart ruler. I think it's important when you're observing a transit to look at what's happening, the activity that's surrounding your chart ruler. So if I was a beginner, and I have done that myself, I like to look and see what is happening with Mercury. Your chart ruler might be Pluto. It'd be interesting for you to see what's happening with Pluto. Again, some of the planets that we're talking about are slower moving. They're generational planets. So you might not necessarily necessarily feel the direct impact in that immediate moment and now, unless you have natal planets that are within degrees of an aspect even forming between the two. But I think I would say look at your chart ruler, the planet that rules your rising sign, your chart, and see what's happening with that activity. I do like to look at Mercury because I like to see in some seasons of my life, and outside of me even being ruled by Mercury, it helps me really understand, like, is this a season in my life where I'm in hermit mode? Or am I really vocalizing myself a bit more? Am I interacting with people a bit more? Do I even want to speak to people a bit more? You know, it really helps me understand. And I think, especially if you do struggle with depression, mental health, and it's on the severe side of things, I would recommend you looking at Mercury's influence, particularly around your transiting chart, how it's impacting you, because I think that helps me understand my relationship with depression. And
Mm.
I would look at Mars for your energy levels. I would definitely look at Mars, your chart ruler, Mercury, Mars. Let's see what's going on with Mars. Let's see what your energy levels are looking like. Let's see what your commitment, your drive and your will, what's happening in this particular season. Is it that when, you know, Mars is in Aries, you have a bit more fire and passion to do something? Or do you feel like you're listening to your spirit to say, actually, this is a season where I need to sit it out and I need to actually just take it slow? I think Mars can sometimes go underlooked, but I think it's such a
Yeah.
igniting planet in the chart to look at and have an understanding as to how it's impacting you. And I think if you are looking to start a new project, if you are looking to commit to something, it'd be interesting to see what Mars is doing in your natal chart, to see how longevity is going to sustain what you're planning. And I want to say the moon because, you know, I'm not one of those people that are like, you need a moon journal. I mean, each to their own. Don't laugh at me, do not laugh. I'm not one of those people who, you know, are on that type of vibe, but I like to see what the moon is doing because when I'm making plans, as I said, when I make plans with friends, when I make plans, even when I schedule our episodes, which this is more electional astrology, but you can do this for your transit chart. I think it's important to see what is happening with the moon, given the fact that it is one of the fasting moving planets that we have in the orbit. I think that it's important to see, is the moon back to the position it was when you were born? Or is the moon opposing your own natal moon? And, you know, how is this impacting your emotions? How is this impacting how you feel? Are you noticing that you are craving companionship? Or do you crave to be in connection with others? And I think, yeah, I would say not, because I think when you try and do too much, it can become overwhelming. And maybe you just need to keep it to just two things
Yeah.
when you are starting out. But if you okay, if you have capacity to look at four, I'd say your chart ruler, I would say Mercury, I'll say the moon, and I would say Mars. If you don't have capacity, I'd say your chart ruler, and I would say the moon would be the starting point. And if you then feel confident enough to
Mm.
expand, then look at Mercury, then
Yeah.
look at Mars. But yes, I think that should sum up my answer. Hopefully, I haven't completely got. Yeah, I hope this is
No,
clear.
I think that's a really digestible way for people to gain a starting point.
Yes.
And again, it's a recent realization, if that makes sense. So I've had this realization many times, but it's come to my mind in the last couple of weeks. And you starting by saying like chart ruler, look at your chart ruler to see what or how you might be influenced in terms of transits. That for me is my go-to, like not consciously, but I always notice how I feel when I enter into a new season. So spoken about
Mm,
before, like how for me Gemini season is usually when I start to feel a bit like more sociable and more just like generally happier to interact with people because it's
hmm.
in my 11th house. But for me, the sun is my chart ruler, so it makes sense what I would look to the sun. But
Yes.
yeah, I think that's a brilliant starting point for people, even if it is, like you said, one of the slower moving planets that you are ruled by. So yeah, thank you
Yes.
for saying that. I think that's really it's a good way for people to kind of gain access into that way.
Yeah, and you don't have to know it all. Like, I still don't know it all. And that's one thing that I think that no matter what you take away from this conversation, it's pacing it in accordance to what you're comfortable with and not what other people outside are doing. Because I think it's quite easy, wherever you go, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, whatever platform it is that you rock your boat, literally, as Mimi said, everywhere. You'll tell somebody 10 planets that you need to know, or 5 transits that you need to know by the end of this month. And it's like, oh, wait up. I can't even absorb all of that. Like, chill.
Yeah,
Sometimes you need to take it slower. Sometimes you might just need to know what the one transit is doing in your chart in order for you to understand, because there's no difference. I feel like at the end of the day, you are not in competition with anybody. And if this is a study and a tool for you to help and heal yourself, then you need to do it at your own pace. And you trying to rush in accordance with another person's timeline in a self-paced study is not going to work. And that's why I say, I do think a great entry point for you in turning that from just knowing that you are a particular rising sign to actually knowing the planet that rules your particular rising sign and understanding the expression that comes with that and governs the way that you interact with the world is important for you to do so, but do so at pace and something that is comfortable for yourself and digestible. That's what I will also say too.
yeah, thank you for that. I love that. We're going to talk about perfection years. So, perfection years, let me start by saying what it is. Then we talk about our relationship with it. So, perfection years is effectively looking at what theme or what might be highlighted for you based off of the age that you are or the age that you are turning. So every age, every age, I was to say every number, every age is associated with a house. So 0 starting at the first house, 1 being the second house, and you would plot it round all the way, all the way, all the way round until you get to whatever age you are. Obviously, there's calculators out there for you to make it easier. But depending on what house you are in, according to your age, might highlight specific areas that you might be called to focus on or that are calling for your attention. So every time you have a birthday, you will transition into a new house. Now, naturally, with that house, it's the house energy, but then there will also be the planetary energy to consider as well. So years ago, I say years ago, not that long ago, between my late 20s to early 30s, I would say I worked with perfection years a lot. I would every year, like clockwork, when it came to my birthday, I would sit and reflect on my perfection year and how I thought it had gone, and also set my hopes, wishes, and intentions for the next perfection year to kind of set the tone in a way. And I loved doing that as a practice. It was a really good way for me to reflect on what's being spotlighted or what was being highlighted and what might potentially come up. But I thought it was quite interesting that uh, we've used both of ourselves as examples. I'm going to use someone different for this example. I'm going to use my son, who is only 3 years old, bless him.
Aw.
He's only 3 years old, but according to his perfection year, he's in his fourth house perfection year. And when we think about the fourth house, it's all about the home, family, your ancestry, your origins. And whilst it doesn't necessarily relate to siblings, that would be more your third house, I believe. I find it interesting that in his house of home, family, um, and your ancestry and origins, that he's really kind of getting a new experience of family in this year, but also he's going to then welcome a little sibling as well. So there's a lot of change that's going to happen for him this year, solely related to house and family. And again, for me, that to witness that through a perfection year tool, I think is just a brilliant, easy hack for you to see where you might be experiencing a pronounced theme or pronounced energy. So yeah, that's how I would describe
Yes.
perfection years.
Really love the example of your son. Like, it's so hearts, hearts, hearts. And if you don't mind me asking, what sign and what planet ruler rules his fourth house?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm gonna have to pull that up. So his chart ruler is Venus. Let's see. I don't know his chart off by heart, you know.
So
So his you say his fourth house. So his fourth, oh
Yes.
yeah, of course, how could I forget?
Capricorn is,
Capricorn fourth house.
yes.
He's got a Capricorn chart.
Okay.
He has got a planet there.
Okay. Two planets there, and the chart ruler would be Saturn for that fourth house.
Hmm.
And I think it's quite interesting how things are happening in relation to that fourth house family and you new beginnings around that. Then also
Yeah.
you welcoming in again another sibling. And I think with your Capricorn, your Saturn energy also situating into that house, I think it's interesting how the activation of that profection, the chart ruler that rules that particular year for him, is really being activated. And I think that's the beauty of the perfection year. I think it's such a great tool to use to understand how there are certain activations that take place. There are
Yeah.
certain themes that might be heightened for
Mhm.
and might cause you to pay attention to, might come into your awareness. They might be things that you'd buried in your subconscious that you hadn't had no plans of dealing with. And I think that's the beauty of, these assisted tools. They're
Yeah.
here to help and, guide you. And I think it's such a beautiful practice that you had that each year that you would take the time out to reflect on where this particular house is being lit up for you and what that planet ruler is saying to you. What is it trying to communicate to you? And what are some of the things that you're communicating back to it as a result of that experience that you've had? Because in as much as the planets are doing things behind the scenes, it's also interacting, these planets are also interacting with our energy. And I think it's important for you to remember that it's an energetic field. It's not just a one sided thing. It requires both things to meet in the middle. And I think the perfection year for me as a tool has been very interesting. I think it's so beautiful how this tool helps to highlight. And as we say, it's all about the expression. Planets are planets, but the expression, depending on, is that again, the house placement, what's happening to it, really come alive when we interact with these planets.
Yes, yeah. It's that, like you said, communication and interaction being key. And again, my kind of advice or guidance for anyone entering into this system is to do exactly that. Build a relationship where you're forming interaction and communication with your perfection year so that you can just start to reflect on, again, that give and take, that reciprocal energy, so that you can learn what might show up, but also how you're relating and experiencing it. So yeah, it's an easy for me, easy, quick way to just kind of
Yes.
figure out what might be going on for you over a year.
And that's a good thing that you mentioned, actually, that, I think it's cool that we're differentiating that, again, your natal chart is about, the positions and the alignments when you're born. A transit chart could be at any particular given moment in time when you decide to pull that transit chart and for the location and city that you might be in. But the perfection year looks at the scope of the year and what that yearly energy is trying to communicate to you and for you to communicate back to it. So I like the distinction between these various assistive tools that can be used to help you along your healing journey.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Um, we also wanted to speak about solar return charts. Again, I think this is something
Yay!
that's more Emily's domain. So yeah, just briefly, how would you explain solar return charts, but also how how can you advise people to work with it?
But- Okay, so in simple words, hopefully, fingers crossed, a solar return chart literally looks at the position of the planetary alignments, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, all of the planets that are key in your chart at the time of your birthday. If I'm not mistaken, when I have pulled my solar return chart, it's always done it as like a day before my actual birthday.
I've
So
seen
that's
that.
something, yeah. So if you are using an astrological birthday, not birthday, an astrological database or website, just bear that in mind. Like, don't discard the solar return chart just because it might appear as the day before your actual birthday. But
Yeah.
essentially, what this chart is trying to communicate to you is the energy that you're stepping into this new year. And your birthday energetically is a chance for you to start again. It's a new portal, it's a new year for you to celebrate being +1, but also the things that are going to happen in the year ahead. And with this particular chart, I find that the sign of the sun doesn't change for me in the solar return chart.
Okay, yes, yes, yes.
Yes. However, the position 100% can change. The degree can change. But I find that things like Venus, for example, different planets within that chart will be in a different position based on the location that you're in. Now, I mean, I'm going to preface this. It's kind of double-sided with astrologers or people who practice and study this topic, because some people tend to believe that if I'm in a particular location, I might be able to cheat fate or destiny by having a different planetary alignment. And I do just want to say that whilst your planetary alignment will 100% change based on the location that you pull up your solar return chart for where you're at in that moment in time, I think it's also important to be real and honest with yourself and not try to, you know, cheat the system. But one thing that I also saw an astrologist say, because I love the work that Kira Ryberg, hopefully I'm not saying her name wrong, she's a Hellenistic astrologer, love what she does, super knowledgeable. She had an episode on solar return charts, and she had a guest on there, and he says that he actually pulls, or he recommends for his clients and people that he coaches, to pull their solar return chart for the location that they were born at as opposed to the city that they're in. And I think that's quite interesting, and I think obviously again it's quite symbolic because that's the location that you were born at. So I understand in terms of the energy that is being harnessed for that particular chart why he might say that. However, your solar return chart, as I said, focuses on the particular energy that surrounds you for that year. What houses, what elements, what placements are going to be more pronounced for you in that season of, you know, that being your birthday up until the next following birthday. And again, you can find it on many astrological databases, AstroSeek, Astro.com, Time Passages, Astromatrix. Like, there are different platforms that will be able to produce your solar return chart. But for me, the reason why I started working with it was just like, I was curious. Like, I like to investigate and research. And I remember going on to AstroSeek, and I think it had the drop down list of like tools that you could use. And, you know, sometimes I look at the moon calendar, sometimes I
Yeah,
look at the transit calendar, and then I
yeah.
saw the solar return chart, and I was like, oh, what is this? And, you know, I got to understand that this is the chart that speaks to the energy that surrounds the new year that comes with you stepping into your birthday. And
Mm-hmm.
then I started to play around, you know, speaking about my birthday last year, that I would have my Venus in Taurus. And I realized that I really did amp up on the beauty side of things, you know. I
Yeah.
started blogging about beauty.
I remember.
Yeah,
Sorry to interject. I remember this because
that's okay.
I want people to understand that Emily weaves these things into our conversations like so frequently. And I remember this time in your life, and I remember the increase of you were doing videos, you were writing
Yes.
products. And I remember you saying, and again, Emily's very good at saying, this is what's happening in my solar return chart. I really want to try and tap into this energy. Want to leverage it. There was something in the last 6 months
Yeah.
you were talking about work, something work related, and you said, oh, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do this. And I was like, I love that.
Yeah, oh my gosh, no, you reminded me. And I feel like,
Mhm.
yeah. And see, guys, like we are practicing what we preach, but also this is what we talk about when we just go from just having an astrological chart to actually harnessing it and using it, like being able to draw its potential out. And I knew that I really wanted to harness the energy of Venus in Taurus. And I feel like now that I'm reflecting, because you know, you can't do the astro without reflection, I think hindsight is such a beautiful thing because it allows you to see the growth that's occurred. And I really realized that I've written about like 4 to 5 articles on beauty related products.
Yeah.
I've done TikTok videos on these kind of things. And it's so crazy. Thank you for that reminder that I really have stepped into that energy. And that's something that I really wanted to utilize. Equally so, this year was a Capricorn moon. And that's a different experience because again, being a Sag moon, that's now crossing over to a different planetary ruler. But I see in some of the ways in which discipline, structure, but also safeguarding, because, you know, we spoke about the fact that while Saturn does have intensity to it, and, you know, there are sometimes not pleasant experiences that come as a result of Saturn transits, But this planet is also here to safeguard us. You said it quite well when we spoke about the veil of Chiron and Saturn in the seventh house. So I would also encourage people to go back to listen to that episode, because Mimi really broke down as somebody who is Saturn dominant, spoke about that particular planet in a way that can, shift your perspective from the doom and gloom and fear mongering. But
Yeah.
yes, with the solar return, you will have, different alignments based on where you are pulling that chart up from. And it's recommended that you pull it up in the city that you're in. But if you would like to experiment, I mean, I'm not against people experimenting with their birth location. I'm going to try that myself this year and see what comes up. But essentially, all of these different factors, all of these different ingredients help you to understand different themes that you might encounter, different themes that might be a bit more pronounced for you, or areas where you can actually work and utilize and harness. Like for myself, I knew that I wanted to harness the energy of Venus. I wanted to harness the fact that Venus was in its natural rulership, being ruled by Taurus. And I wanted to make sure that I tapped into that energy through beauty. So I think it allows you to plan, which I do a lot of, but also allows you to play around a bit and experiment and trial and error things out and find out what rocks your boat and what doesn't. So hopefully I have explained. I mean, I would like to bounce out the question back to you. I mean, with the solar return chart, is this something that you frequently look at? And if not, is it something that you started looking at a bit more recently? And also, how do you utilize the energy of your solar return chart if you do use it?
I don't, because my solar return chart only comes up when you and I are speaking about it. And
Yes.
actually, as you were talking, I thought, let me have a look at my solar return chart. It was when you were talking about being a Capricorn moon for
Yes.
your solar return. I thought that's so interesting. What am I? What's happening? And then you said Venus was the next thing that you were leveraging or trying to leverage.
Yes.
So for me, is something that I really don't work with, but now I'm curious to explore it a bit more. And again, like that's the beauty of being able to have these sorts of conversations. And I hope that those that are listening also have that curiosity to then go and explore your own stuff. But I'm a Cancer moon at the minute, or this year, and my Venus is in Pisces, which I find really interesting.
Sorry, I just want to go backtrack to you being a Cancer moon. I think it's quite interesting how Jupiter's also been in Cancer and you are a Cancer moon. What degree is it at, if you don't mind sharing?
At 10. I don't
10.
know why my eyes were like doing darting all over the page.
And it happens. But
It's
that's quite interesting that, again, like you said, you're bringing forth life, you've created life. And what house placement is this moon in?
my 12th.
In your 12th house. And
Mm,
natally, it's your
mm,
12th house is ruled by Cancer. And that's where Jupiter was, Jupiter is about expansion. And I think because the moon, fertility, it's what was used to track fertility, it was
yeah.
used to track the cycles. I think it's quite interesting how this transit might have or could have played a role in the
Mm,
creation of life that you're bringing forth.
for real. It's really interesting. I think um, Emily rightly kind of suggested as well, well, not directly, but looking at key planets, I think would help for people to really just sit with the energy and to understand it. Because even just looking at the moon, I'm like, I really need to kind of like digest that and process that, because it's
Yes.
opposing my natal moon effectively. It's in the opposite side, it's in the sister sign for me. So it's a different expression of, it's the other side of the coin.
It is the polarity between the two. I remember there was a point where I think it was last year. Was it, what year was we in? 2025. We're in 2026 right now. In 2025, I think we had pulled up, there was one conversation I remember quite vividly where you would your solar return chart for 2025, you were going to be a Venus and Aries
Yeah.
native. And I remember, and something about exploring your passions, like not holding back on
Mhm.
experiences was big in that conversation.
Not to derail the conversation, but
Mhm.
I have noticed how much more vocal, let's say, I am during this pregnancy, particularly
Mm.
professionals, and really
Yes.
like standing up for what I feel is right and what doesn't feel right. And
Mhm.
yeah, and again, I think for me, the 11th house is also about I don't know, not it's kind of like that gifts from heaven for me for the 11th house, and that things that come unsurprisingly, unknowingly, that luck, that serendipity kind of energy. And
Oh,
it kind of, for me, it makes sense why conception and birth is
yeah.
now happening in this season.
Season. And that's your solar return chart for this year, 2026.
Sorry, I went back to the perfection.
Perfection. Okay, the perfection. Sorry. Mm. And the advocacy, and I mean, Mercury, there's no way that you aren't going to advocate or have to learn the art of advocating with
Yeah.
this particular chart ruler. And when you think about the last episode where we spoke about the behind the scenes, where you said you were doing audio content for the other place where you work at. And I think that's also quite interesting that your voice,
Mm. Mm.
yeah.
And these are like, again, the examples of how you can see something on paper slash in a chart, but then also be experiencing it in real life, and how just being able to explore your chart through a tool can help you to connect those dots, as Emily said earlier. So yeah, I think it's a beautiful example.
Because I know that I refer to this a bit early on when I was looking at transits, but one thing that I do use, and I think I'm still a novice at it, but I'm gathering like an octopus who's spreading its tentacles out. I'm like feeling my way through electional astrology, and that's literally where you are pulling up a birth chart for a particular event. It could be a life event, it could be marriage, it could be pregnancy. Well, you can't really, I mean, conception. Let me say, if you're trying to plan conception, it could be, you know, if you are planning a particular event. But it's essentially when you're looking at key areas of your life where you're trying to plan for in advance, but you would like to harness, utilize the positive energies, planetary alignments that are existing. And I think I use this, the reason why I touch base on it with transits, because I think it coincides. Although you're not pulling a transit chart, you're literally pulling a birth chart for that particular time and for the location that you're in, but you're not doing it to transit anything. You're doing it as a whole new birth chart. I
Oh,
think it's a useful tool to use. If you're selling something, for example, even if you're in sales and you're trying to figure out how I could use the beneficial, the positive energy from particular planetary alignments. If you wanted to harness Venus energy, Jupiter energy, which is typically associated with money, or when people are a bit more, you know, if Jupiter is in a positive alignment with Venus, people might be a bit more willing to spend the cash for it. They might be a bit more willing to hear you out or even listen to you and not shut down that idea. I think electional astrology is used by traditional astrologers, even modern astrologers, but I think it's a technique that comes from or has roots in Hellenistic astrology. I
yeah.
think it's something that I would love more people. It is an art and it is a science. I think people who are well versed in it benefit from it quite a lot. It is something that people solely practice. So, like, if they are providing professional services in their practice, there are people who solely just focus on electional astrology.
Mm.
Now, the reasons why I used it is I like to plan. You know how we spoke about chart rulers earlier on? I like to plan when we're putting out our content. So, for example, we have our main episode recordings, which come out every month, right? We then also have episode quotes. And, you know, I haven't used electional astrology for that, but what I did use for that was the chart rulers, the planets that rule particular days of the week. So again, you've got Monday ruled by the moon, Tuesday ruled by Mars, Wednesday ruled by Mercury, Thursday ruled by Jupiter, Friday ruled by Venus, Saturday ruled by Saturn, and Sunday ruled by the Sun. Now, you know, in planning when to release our episode quotes, which are longer form, they're written, deal with us, you know, using words as opposed to videos or clips. I was like, these should probably go out on a Mercury day because it's when people's minds might get ticking, you know, and it might be more receptive. People might be more receptive to actually reading through those slides because
Yeah.
it's not fast form content. It's content that requires you to pause, read and reflect. And that's why I use the, you know, the days of the week and the planets that rule those particular days of the week to, you know, schedule that. But going back to the episode recordings, when I look at the calendar for the month, although we try and keep our uploads to Sundays, Mimi's given me free will to decide, you know, when we do upload our episodes. And
Mm.
I basically go to astroseek.com. I pull up the birth chart. I use London as the location. That's the generic location that I use. I select various dates that fall on a Sunday in a given month. The first thing that I do look at, which Chris Brennan, who is really big on electional astrology, and he has a few episodes, I think, on his own podcast, the Astrology podcast on electional astrology. He basically ask beginners or people who are starting out and are curious to learn and dabble into this area to A, look at the chart ruler, and to B, look at the moon if you're starting
Yeah.
out.
Okay, that's
And
really
like,
interesting.
yes. So those are the two areas that, he recommends as, an entry point into this area of astrology. And I do exactly what he mentions. I look at the particular
Mm.
chart ruler, the planet that is ruling that chart ruler, and then I look at the condition of the moon. Is the moon being afflicted? When I say afflicted, again, affliction isn't for you to fret and think, oh my God, no, it's positive, it's negative, and I can't use the energy of this. Affliction simply means that multiple interactions are happening with this particular planet. Maybe it's being squared, maybe it's being conjuncted, maybe it's being opposed. What's happening with the condition of the moon? And I kind of plan our release dates around that. Have I seen positive results? I feel like it's really hard to tell. Like I said, if you listen to behind the scenes, because our interaction varies, I can't necessarily track things. However, I do realize that in planning certain episodes and releasing them in particular dates, I do feel that it has had some positive effect. I mean, I might be able to report back to you guys by the end of the season because I really tried it out in season 2, not so much season 1.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I use electional astrology for our podcast.
Yeah.
And also briefly touching on how I use planet rulers to schedule and plan out when we release particular content. But I think if you are, maybe you can try it out for someone who is new. Don't overwhelm yourself. If you want to start with transits, you're fair and fine to start with transits. If you want to start with electional astrology, you're more than welcome to do so. But I think once you have gained the confidence with understanding a transit chart, because I think that will help you build the foundation as to understanding, what particular date you should elect a particular thing, activity, or service for.
Yeah.
Then that might be easier for you to understand. But the reason why I'm able to use it is because I have some form of understanding of how to interpret, a transit chart. And I take that knowledge and, shoot it across to the electional astrology side of things when scheduling what Sunday to release our episodes for. Again, we try and release our episodes like mid of the month. So I try and flex between the first Sunday of the month and then the Sunday after the middle Sunday of the month, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And just so many different thoughts were coming up for me hearing you speak. And again, I was pulling up another chart. But it's I just find it interesting because I'm going to be very generic, but there's obviously nuance and depth to this. Emily very much likes to plan and like the plan and the head, like seeing ahead and seeing the future. I would lean that more to Emily. Whereas I will just kind of like flow and
Yeah.
intuit through life. Emily does this as well, by the way. I'm not saying Emily isn't flowy or intuitive. She does do it. But if we were to kind of put us in two different camps, I think that would make sense.
Yes.
So it's very interesting to hear your perspective on forward planning things and being able to elect days for certain things, as you've said, but also how you can enhance the energy and try to boost the energy by kind of like tweaking what days you might select to do something or release
Yes.
something based off of a chart. And unknowingly, and maybe there's probably another better way to do this, and obviously there are various different factors that come into play, but unknowingly, intuitively, I pulled up the estimated birth chart of this second child, and we don't know when I'm going to give birth. Like, it could happen at any moment, but I didn't do that for Kai. And I'm sure there's another way, but I remember doing that and not knowing what to look at because my goal or my intention was to kind of see what the overall energy might be around the birth specifically,
Yes.
because I'm really trying to have a different energy this time around in terms of birth. And unknowingly, obviously I didn't have a time, so I couldn't put a time, but I looked at the moon. So
Mhm.
very interesting that you said the two things that you would recommend, chart ruler and moon. Obviously there's
Yes.
other things in terms of birth that I would probably prioritize as well, but I just find it such to me it doesn't seem that complicated. I think transit charts seem more complicated than electional.
Electional.
Yeah, I actually can see the benefits on and how it can be easy to digest in a way, astrology, in comparison to a transit chart, but obviously they both carry different benefits. But yeah, I found that very interesting that intuitively that's where I was led to, and that's what you're saying from experience.
Yes. And I mean, Chris Brennan did actually recommend starting with those 2 points in your beginner side of the journey. There are going to be other considerations for you to factor in when
Yeah,
you're looking at birth. Like I would look at Mars, for example.
that
I
was
would want to look at what's, yeah.
that was the second, that was the second thought that I would have had as well.
For centuries, people have been doing this. I mean, these are more of the, I guess, traditional forms of astrology,
Yeah,
the forms that, yeah, that lean more towards the Hellenistic side of astrology. But I think all of these tools are, we're not tampering with fate and destiny here, but we're trying to understand the alignments of how we can use these planets to assist us with our own life experiences, really. And this is why we do it. And I think if you've got the curiosity, I mean, it's never killed the cat, so why not try and explore it if you can?
definitely. And again, that was the intention for us to have this conversation. It's not necessarily to give you absolutely every single tool so that you can do absolutely every single thing, but just for you to kind of feel into what feels good or what feels right for you, and then just do what you can with it and see what new insights or what new perspectives you might gain from looking at your chart in a different way. So yeah, thank you for that. I love that. I'm going to ask you some hot seat questions. I've got two for you, if that's okay.
I wanted
Um,
to ask, just to follow
oh
up on this one, yes, I wanted to ask you, in your journey as a student and lover of the stars, what astrological database did you start off with first? And where do
yeah.
you pull up your birth charts? And did you always find it easy to interpret a birth chart? Or what was your process in learning to understand how
Mm.
to interpret a birth chart?
Great question. Great question. Cafe astrology was the first one. And I say that with disdain because I remember looking at it thinking, I do not understand this. I don't get it. And even
Yes.
now, I will avoid that like the plague because I don't like the way that they format it. It's
Yeah.
too, for me, it's too wordy. It misses out. I think it doesn't put your ascendant. It's just like, for me, it's like system overload looking at cafe astrology. But that was my first
Mhm.
one. I think then it would have been AstroSeek, and that is my go-to now, AstroSeek.
Yeah.
I always go back to AstroSeek. For personal, professional client work, I'm always using AstroSeek because for me, the visual layout of it makes sense and it negates the words. Like you have to fill in the gaps in a way. If you're like writing up a report, for example. But I think for me, I still would say that obviously I am learning and continuously learning, but what enabled me to really understand how to look at a chart was studying. Like I don't have a glamorous answer. For me, when I did my astrology module when I was training, that made it make sense. Up until that point, I was looking and I was looking and I was looking, and I wasn't really getting it until I was taught it. And even then, when I was taught it, it was like something landed, and then I was able to kind of weave my intuition into it. All of a sudden, it was like I could hear a chart and I could feel a chart because I was then given the foundation, if that makes sense. But before that,
Yeah.
I was looking at basically gobbledygook to me.
And I think you've come on to a very interesting point because I know you're going to the hot seat question, so I'm going to try and sum this up. But twofold question here.
Mm,
One, in wider astrological communities or, platforms that
mm,
exist on social media, do you feel like there's a space for intuitive astrology? Or do you feel that that's sometimes undermined as people not being well versed in the study and hence relying or wanting to seek to rely on their intuition? Do you feel that there's a space that acknowledges that intuitive astrology exists and is real? And B, for somebody who might struggle with databases which are like word overdriven, information overload, are there any other platforms outside of AstroSeek that you could recommend? Or are there any tips or tricks that you've tried and experimented with that have helped you try and reduce stuff that causes your mind to go into overload? Yeah, those two questions.
I love that first question. I do think it is undermined and undervalued to be an intuitive astrologer, because I think sometimes people assume that if you are an intuitive astrologer, that you don't take the study of astrology seriously. And I think that's an unfair assumption to make. But I think there is room for being both. And for me, astrology is a difficult system to get if you don't study. I do think an element of study is required, even if it's self-study, even if it's
Yes.
that you like sitting with your chart and looking at it over and over again and trying to like analyze it, even if it's a book, even if it's a podcast, a YouTube. I think it requires some sort of foundational knowledge or assistance in that way. But it's really bizarre to say, from a part of my journey, I had to understand that the psychic part of me, the psychic element, is my pronounced strength. And it's only when I started to go and sit with planets, somehow they would like, come and sit with us. And like today, it was like, Mercury wants to come and have a chat. And I'm like, oh, okay, then let me go and have a chat with Mercury then. And then I had to really feel the energy. That's also what assisted the process of me understanding, okay, planets speak to me.
Yes.
Park the education side for a little bit, because otherwise I'd be looking at a chart too analytically, when my brain, my soul feels it because they speak to me. I don't know if that makes sense, but honestly, there was a period of my time where planets were just showing themselves to me. Even now, when I do readings, a tarot reading, for example, a planet will come through and say, this person needs to work with us. And I'm like, how do I explain that to the person?
Yes. Very interesting. 'Cause you know what? The fact that you mentioned that sometimes in these spaces, it's looked down, or sometimes I say for people who have gone to the schools and have done the full-fledged thing, it can be looked down upon. I've done a lot of self-study. I've
Mm,
not taken a particular course, but a lot of what I've known and acquired has come from my own personal research or self-study.
mm,
And I always say that I'm still studying, very much a student. However, quite like yourself, I do believe that's why when you said the planets speak to you, it's like I can look at a particular aspect in somebody's chart and then just things will be rolling in. And it's not that because I've gone to this textbook, I love a good textbook and I do have a few, but it's come from the spirit. And I think
yes.
I've always questioned like where do these insights or downloads come from? I guess, if we look deep into our ancestry, we'll be able to figure out some of these things. But I think you're right that sometimes there's not space provided for people who are multifaceted and gifted. And as you said, in your practice, when you're with clients, you
Mm,
don't just fuse the tarot. Planets are communicating to you. And that's not coming from a book. And we're not looking down on people who have gone the academic route, but you understand in the ways in which you approach and utilize this study that you need to live through the experience. You need to allow the planets to communicate and express themselves through you. So I think that I really do resonate with that. And I think that's very important to distinguish that there is space, although it might not seem that way. And I think this is mainly really on Twitter. I see that debate a lot where it's like
no.
intuitive astrology. isn't really a thing? How can you be
Okay.
an intuitive when it's like you need to study the subject and study the art? And people really do go back and forth on this particular topic. But I want you to understand that sometimes you have to block out noise. Sometimes I just have to exit those discussions because I understand that there is
Mm.
a space for intuitive astrologers and it's a very real thing.
It is. And to be honest, I've never, I'm yet to be proven wrong. Like I'm yet to sit with someone's chart and share someone's chart and they say to me, no, that's not me. That doesn't resonate. Same for when Emily gives me insights about my chart. Not a single time has she been wrong. She's always been correct. And I know that her process is feeling, seeing, experiencing the chart, and that it just kind of comes through to her. And then that's what she's communicated. Always been right, always resonated. So there is so much space and so much room for people to weave their gifts in. So yeah, I agree. I can't remember your second question though,
And
sorry.
when you pull up an astrological chart and it says draw aspects to all of these positions, do you sometimes untick that box? What do you do to help you process that chart a bit more in ways that are easy for you to digest and don't overwhelm or overload you?
That's a really good question. I stick to the same website
Yes.
as I mentioned. I will start with whole sign as like a quote easy rounded way, and then I might compare to a different house system just to see if I can get a different perspective. But otherwise, I don't do anything
Think, okay.
to make it digestible or
Yeah.
simpler. Yeah, what about you?
I mean, I like the contrast between the house systems, and I do think that, again, there can be that pit against Placidus versus whole sign and all these other things. And I think all of
Indeed.
these systems can be used to provide further context. It can help you see things from a different perspective. So I think that's also interesting that you do that in your practice. And I think for myself, when I feel like the lines are overwhelming me, I will unclick that aspects to all objects and focus on some of the cool ones because I like to pull up some of the asteroids. I like to pull up some of these things, and it can get very overwhelming when aspects are coming, like you've seen red lines and thick lines and thin lines, and it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. I use astro.com. Now, in a course that I did do many moons ago, the practitioner, she geared towards astro.com, but I realized that there is like a table, is it like a spreadsheet? It's like a,
Yes,
yeah, and it's got the planets on your, is it your vertical, and then you got
yeah,
horizontally, so you've got planets horizontally and vertically, and that helps me with reading out the aspects. So I do use that sometimes if I feel like the circle is, whoa, the lines are overwhelming me, because I think, yeah, sometimes the colors do throw me off. And
yeah,
even though I use time passages, it's not really the most, I want to say, user friendly in terms of the visuals, because I think sometimes it's better than some of the other ones, but sometimes the lines and the colors really throw me off. And I think that's something to bear in mind if you are somebody who can get thrown off that way. I do think
yeah.
AstroSeek visually, it does the job, and it doesn't overwhelm you. And like Mimi says, yes, I think it's advancing and it's added more, I mean, some people would say AI features. It's added more context to its site. So you might get more of a description of particular aspects. I think it's always provided decent length paragraphs for each aspect.
Mhm.
It's just that some of the aspects might not have been covered if it's like, asteroids or certain things like that. But I think, yes, if you need to untick a few boxes, untick a few boxes. Sometimes I include my asteroids. Sometimes if I just want to know what's going on, I won't. Sometimes I let certain asteroids speak to me and I pick specific ones. So yeah, I think it's really figuring out using your tentacles to feel your way through what system and what things you're willing to look at and explore in a chart.
I find that so interesting that you use the table, because that,
Really?
yeah, and I had to pull up my chart with the
Yes.
table, and for as long as I've been working with astrology, I've always found the table overwhelming, and I've always been like, no, too much information. But actually now, hearing you say that and looking at it, I'm like, but actually, this is a really easy way.
It
This is
is.
a really easy way to see how things are relating to one
And
another.
100%. And once you understand the triangle, what that means, that's the trine.
Yeah.
Once you understand the circle, once you understand,
Yeah.
once you get to grips with the symbols that represent the aspects, and there are times where I think I shared this with you, when Mercury was retrograde earlier on this year, sometime in March or April. I really couldn't fathom the astro. Like my head was just blocked and it wasn't flowing. And I remember when I was prepping for your personal story episode, that at one point I just pulled the table and I was able to understand it without the confusion. And sometimes you do
Okay.
have to step away, but the
Okay.
table, yeah, it really does help me. Like once I can get around my head that this is horizontal, this is vertical, because I'm terrible with my left and right. And that's one thing that, yeah, it's a yeah, I'm so bad with my left and right. But once
Yeah.
I figure out that this is where the aspect is being made, it does make sense to me. And then I'm able to form the words in my head on my own and feel what the transit is saying to me.
That's so funny because that's exactly what the barrier was for me in terms of like identifying, okay, the left, the right, where does it intersect? And it just became
Yes.
too mathematical and yeah, too much for me. So yeah, I totally resonate with that. Okay, so our hot seat question. So, well, questions because I've got two. What part of your chart do you think you're currently being asked to embody? Is the first question.
Ooh. Oh wow. You know what? I'm gonna say the first answer that jumps up to me, and that's my eighth house. My Aries ruled eighth house. And I think
Okay.
because this is where Saturn and Neptune are currently sitting right now for me, because my focus for a very long time was that seventh house that had all that Pisces activity going on. But when we hit Aries season, I really started to understand, I started to want to understand the influence of that area of my house, which is home to my part fortune in Aries, but also how this energy expresses or reveals itself to me and how I seek to work with Neptune and Saturn in this house. Because again, when you think about Saturn in the eighth house, I know we've had personal conversations of, yes, it can be a dark transit. There is no sugarcoating that. But I also want to learn how I can still maintain some sort of openness as to how I can allow that planet to communicate to me. So I'd say, yeah, that's that area of my chart so far.
I love that. And with that, are there any cycles that you are resisting in relation to your chart?
Oh, okay. Can you provide a bit more context? Yes, when you say
So
cycles.
is there something that's highlighted for you in your chart? Again, depending on whatever avenue you're accessing your chart, so whether it's through your solar return, transit, profection, whichever, is there
Okay.
something that's highlighted that you're very, very aware of, but you are resisting?
I feel like two things come out to me. I think we've always spoken about the crossroads, like being placed in situations where I have to choose the moral high ground. That's
Mm,
one. And I speak about the crossroads, doing the better thing.
yeah.
um, and two, I feel like there's been a lifelong lesson within my chart of letting go.
Mm,
Again, South Node in Taurus, North Node in Scorpio axis. Like I
yeah.
feel that that's not really an area that came into my awareness when I started out in my journey, but hitting my reverse nodal return, which simply means when the nodes are in the opposite position as to what they were during the time you were born, I realized that the nodes really came into my awareness, and that theme, that cycle, it's still looping, guys. It's not something I've overcome at all. And I think even that decision of the crossroads, I think that really came to my awareness last year when I wrote something about life on the
Mm,
crossroads. And I think having those critical degrees
mm,
sometimes means having to choose things in the sake of morality or knowing better and having to
mm.
do better. Yeah. I mean, you're
I
thinking
think that
deep.
makes sense. No,
Yeah.
it makes sense for sure. Whole like episode on the nose. I think we say this quite a lot actually. But
We do. I do want to reflect the question back at you though.
yeah.
In regards to, I mean, you could choose either or the particular area of your chart that's being emphasize to you, or that you are taking an openness, an open heart to, and a willingness to explore and
Yeah.
be the particular cycle that you have, it's in your awareness, you recognize, and you can see that it's a theme that you are here to
Yeah.
learn from.
You know what? My answer is actually the same for both questions.
Yeah.
It's a planet, and for me it's Jupiter, and it's really trying to, number one, get to know Jupiter in relation to my natal chart, but then getting to know Jupiter in relation to the transit, because for me it will be a relatively significant transit this year, it going into Leo. And I for some reason this let's say the last 6 to 8 months, whenever I felt stuck, Jupiter's the one that's been like, hello, did you forget about me? Did you forget about us? It, like, Jupiter's the one that keeps kind of like trying to pull me back into some sort of reflective action. I've had series and points of time where I've not been getting it, I've not understood it,
Yeah.
therefore I have the resistance to Jupiter and then that cycle that it's trying to teach me. But now I'm at the point where it's more in my conscious awareness, and I'm really trying
Mm,
to not just understand it but embody Jupiter for me. And again, I think that is indicative of an incoming transit that I can
yes.
feel that's happening, because it's been in my 12th
Mm,
house
and-
for how
oh
many
my
months?
gosh. I think it's been roughly been 18 months.
It's been a
Yeah,
long,
you
well, in theory, it's been a long time, but over a year, as Emily said. It's weird because, like, when you mentioned about 12th house transits and
yeah.
how you feel, it's weird to have your Jupiter transiting quite a undercover house, let's
Yeah.
say, because it really did show itself to me in that 12th house transit, but not in an outward forward momentum perspective.
Mm.
It came about as a, homie, you need to really think about these things. Like, girl, you need to really, really pause and sit with these things.
Firstly, I completely forgot that you're having this big Jupiter cycle coming up
I
soon.
know, I
And
know.
and it really, and again, your body preparing you for the very fact that this is, you can feel internally that change and things
Yeah,
around and internally, even not just externally, but everything around you it's simmering, it's brewing. And I think
it is.
you speaking about Jupiter not necessarily being the loud bang transit, like with Mercury, it gets its
Mm,
marketing, it gets its promo that
yeah.
people know Mercury retrograde is gonna happen. Like people have it on the records. But I saw an astrologer whose knowledge, shall I say, I respect and highly admire, Yakari Gabriel, if I've got her name correct.
Mhm.
And she wrote about Jupiter, actually. She wrote something about the fact that sometimes Jupiter transits, if you don't sit in the stillness to observe and allow them to communicate to you, you might not even recognize this transit is impacting you. And the
It's
very fact that you said that it was an intern, like you could feel it, but it wasn't loud, it wasn't clangy, it didn't come bush bam in your face.
yeah,
And I think that's the beauty of also understanding transits. You might not need to understand the whole transit chart, baby. Like, we just want you to be able to pick up key things that resonate with your spirit. And the rest will come as it needs to come and unfold to you. But the fact that you can, like, you observed
mm,
Jupiter being in your 12th house, it
mm,
wasn't something that came up boom in your face, but it did make you question a lot of things. It did make you revisit. And bearing in mind, your natal Jupiter is retrograde as well. That's
mm,
something that I think you had to learn on the course of this duration. And the 12th house, people say it's hermit mode, but I think it's also the stuff that happens in the unseen realms. So maybe a lot of this stuff has been happening beyond the human eye, which we speak about with the retrograde movement, that these are things that people might not visibly see until the roots are germinating through, and you're blooming and blossoming through because you've gone through the soul evolution that's happened beneath the surface. But I think it's so, and as somebody who's coming up with this
mm.
Jupiter and Leo transit in my 12th house, it's quite crazy that we need to have a catch up about that. We
I
do,
know.
yeah.
I'm always like a little bit mindful sometimes when I say about a transit that is happening or happened for me, because I'm very aware that as it exits my energy, it's going to go into your energy.
Energy.
And
Yeah.
something really beautiful for us to talk about it and reflect about it in real time. It's nice, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to put you off, even though I know that we have
Yeah.
different expressions and different things that will manifest in that way. I'm always very like cautious in saying that, yeah, I don't ever want it to come across as doom and gloom, but it is
Yes.
interesting to have people in your circle who are either side of you. So whether they're even in a moon sense as well,
Yeah.
in front, the next sign behind, so your
Right.
neighbors. I find
Oh
that
my,
relational dynamic so fascinating.
your neighbors. I like that. That sounds so wholesome and cute. But no, thank you for that. I mean, I still will be asking you about this transit anyway, but no, thank you for sharing that.
I love that. And we hope that through listening to this episode, you are able, or you feel empowered to look at your chart differently and start to work with really anchoring the energy of your chart. It doesn't matter which one you choose to go for, go with what feels good, go with what feels right to you, and know that this is all a learning process. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for listening. And please make sure you subscribe. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which include Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Substack. And I always think, am I forgetting something?
No, you've got everything on board.
So thank you for listening, and we will catch up with you soon.